I never thought a potted plant would nearly destroy my life, but that's exactly what happened when Karen Whitfield moved into the house across the street from mine in Saguaro Springs, a planned community in Phoenix, Arizona. It was a scorching Tuesday in late August when I first noticed her standing on my front porch, clipboard in hand, measuring tape stretched across my doorway. I'd just pulled into my driveway after a brutal day managing IT systems for a medical practice downtown, and there she was, a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair that somehow defied the 108-degree heat, wearing a crisp white polo shirt with HOA board member embroidered in navy blue. "Excuse me," I called out, climbing out of my Honda Civic and feeling the pavement burn through my work shoes. "Can I help you?" She looked up from her clipboard with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Oh, you must be David Martinez. I'm Karen Whitfield, newly elected to the HOA board. I'm just conducting a routine compliance inspection of my front porch." "Well, yes." She gestured toward my small potted barrel cactus sitting beside my front door. "I'm afraid this violates Section 12.4 of our community guidelines. No unapproved plantings are permitted in the front yard landscaping zone." I stared at her, then at the cactus my late grandmother had given me 3 years ago. It was maybe 18 inches tall, sitting in a simple terracotta pot that matched the desert aesthetic of every other house in our neighborhood. "That's been there for 3 years. Nobody's ever said anything about it. Previous boards may have been lax in enforcement, but we're committed to maintaining property values and community standards." She made a note on her clipboard with theatrical precision. "You have 72 hours to remove the unauthorized plant material, or you'll face a $50 fine." $50 for a cactus? Repeated violations incur escalating penalties. I trust you'll take care of this promptly. She folded her measuring tape with a sharp snap. "Have a blessed day, David." I watched her walk across the street to her pristine 2-story house with its perfectly manicured front yard, which I noticed for the first time featured at least 6 potted plants arranged around her covered entryway. That evening, I called my neighbor Rick Santos, who lived 2 houses down and had been in Saguaro Springs since the community was built 8 years ago. Rick worked as a contractor and knew everyone in our little enclave of 47 homes. Karen Whitfield. Rick's laugh carried clearly through my phone as I sat on my back patio, looking out at the shared desert preserve behind our houses. "Dude, she bought that house specifically to get on the HOA board. Told my wife Linda she was going to clean up this neighborhood. Been here all of 3 months and already got herself elected. How's that even possible?" Emergency election. Mrs. Chen, who was board president for 4 years, had to move to assisted living after her stroke. Karen volunteered to serve out the term, and nobody else wanted the headache. Board meetings are usually just 3 people arguing about pool maintenance and trash pickup schedules. What about her own plants? She's got a whole botanical garden on her front porch. Different rules for different people, I guess. You gonna fight it? I looked through my kitchen window at my grandmother's cactus, remembering how proud she'd been when she repotted it for me the last Christmas, before her emphysema got bad. Yeah, I think I am. The next morning I did what any reasonable person would do in 2024, I researched. The HOA governing documents were available online, and I spent my lunch break reading through 37 pages of dense legal language. Section 12.4 did indeed prohibit unapproved plantings in designated front yard landscaping zones, but Section 3.7 established a grandfather clause for any landscaping elements present for more than 18 months, and Section 15.2 required written notice of violations to be delivered via certified mail. Karen had hand-delivered her clipboard citation, and my cactus had been grandfathered in twice over. I printed out the relevant sections and drove home early, planning to have a reasonable conversation with my new neighbor. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw Karen's white Honda Pilot parked in front of my house, and Karen herself standing in my front yard with 2 other people, a thin man in his 60s wearing a polo shirt identical to hers, and a heavy-set woman with short gray hair carrying what looked like a professional camera. "David," Karen called out with that same fake smile. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet Tom Bradley, our board secretary, and Janet Morrison, our community compliance officer." "I'm not aware of any compliance officer position," I said, walking toward my front door, and noting that the heavyset woman was indeed photographing my cactus from multiple angles. "Janet volunteers her time to help document violations," Tom Bradley said in a nasal voice that immediately set my teeth on edge. "She has extensive experience in property management." "Before we escalate this matter further," Karen said, "I wanted to give you one final opportunity to remedy the situation voluntarily." I pulled the printed HOA documents from my work bag. "Actually, I think there might be some confusion about the rules here. According to Section 3.7, "Oh, David." Karen's voice dripped with condescension. "I appreciate your attempt to research this, but the board has final authority on all interpretive matters. Tom here has a background in real estate law." Tom Bradley puffed up his chest. "I worked as a paralegal for 3 years in the 1980s. The grandfather clause only applies to major structural improvements, not decorative elements." "That's not what it says here." I held up the document. Quote, "Any landscaping, structural modification, or decorative element present on a property for more than 18 consecutive months shall be considered approved unless specifically prohibited by state or local ordinance." Janet Morrison looked up from her camera. "When exactly did you install this plant?" 3 years ago, Christmas Day 2021. "Can you prove that?" Karen asked. I thought about the photos on my phone from that Christmas, my grandmother carefully explaining how barrel cacti needed excellent drainage and minimal water. "Yes, actually I can." "Well, we'll need to see that documentation before we can consider any grandfathering claims," Tom said. "In the meantime, the violation stands. And," Karen added with a triumphant smile, "I'm afraid we've identified several additional issues during today's inspection." My stomach dropped. "Such as—" Janet Morrison consulted her camera's display screen. "Your garbage cans are visible from the street, which violates Section 8.2. Your front door paint color appears to be non-compliant with approved color palette C14. And this concrete walkway has multiple cracks that could be considered a safety hazard under Section 19.1. I looked at my perfectly ordinary beige front door, then at the hairline cracks in my walkway that were identical to those on every other house in the neighborhood. "You've got to be kidding me." "Community standards benefit everyone, David," Karen said. "I'm sure you want to be a good neighbor." "I've been a good neighbor for 3 years. I've never had a complaint from anyone." "Previous boards were unfortunately permissive," Tom said. "We're simply bringing enforcement up to proper standards." After they left, I sat on my front steps and called Rick again. "They're hitting other people too," Rick told me. "The Patels got cited for having a welcome mat that's the wrong size. Mrs. Rodriguez got fined because her house numbers aren't reflective enough. It's like Karen's going house to house with a magnifying glass. This can't be legal." "Probably not, but fighting it costs money and time. Most people just pay the fines and fix whatever she complains about." "How much are we talking about?" $50 for the first violation, $100 for the second, $250 for the third. Mrs. Rodriguez is already up to $250 because Karen decided her mailbox was aesthetically inconsistent after she fixed the house numbers. That weekend, I decided to document everything. I walked through the entire neighborhood with my phone photographing every potential violation I could find. It was eye-opening. Nearly every house had some minor issue that could be construed as non-compliant faded paint, cracked walkways, decorative elements that weren't in the approved architectural guidelines. But the most interesting discovery was Karen's own house. Her 6 potted plants were arranged around a front entryway that, according to the architectural guidelines, had been modified without approval. The original builder plans showed a simple concrete stoop, but Karen's house featured an extended covered porch with decorative pillars that definitely hadn't been part of the original construction. Monday morning, I received my official violation notice via certified mail. $50 for the cactus, $50 for visible garbage cans, $75 for the door color, and $125 for the safety hazard of my cracked walkway. Total $300 payable within 10 days or subject to additional late fees and potential legal action. I called the HOA management company listed on the letterhead. Saguaro Springs HOA, this is Michelle speaking. Hi, I'm calling about some violation notices I received. I'm David Martinez, lot 43. Oh yes, Mrs. Whitfield mentioned you might be calling. She said you were being uncooperative about compliance issues. I think there might be some errors in the citations. I'd like to request copies of the relevant sections of the governing documents along with the architectural approval records for my property. There was a pause. I'll need to check with the board about that. We don't usually provide detailed documentation for minor violations. These aren't minor. They're asking for $300 in fines for things that have been on my property for years, without any previous issues. I'll have Mrs. Whitfield call you back. Karen called that evening while I was making dinner for my daughter Sophia, who was visiting for her week with me following our custody arrangement. David, I understand you're confused about the violation process, but I want to make something very clear. Karen's voice was crisp and professional. The board has broad discretionary authority to enforce community standards. Arguing about technicalities is only going to make this more difficult for everyone. I'm not arguing about technicalities. I'm asking for the documentation I'm entitled to under Arizona HOA law. Are you threatening legal action? I'm asking for transparency. I see. Her tone turned icy. Well, since you want to be difficult about this, I should probably mention that we've identified some additional concerns. Your daughter was riding her bicycle on the common area sidewalks during her last visit, which violates our recreational use policies. And your weekend barbecue activities appear to be creating smoke issues that could affect your neighbors' enjoyment of their properties. I felt my blood pressure spike. You've been watching my daughter. I've been documenting ongoing compliance issues, which is my responsibility as a board member. She's 10 years old, Karen. She was riding her bike on public sidewalks. The sidewalks within our community are private property maintained by the HOA. Recreational cycling is restricted to designated areas only. Where exactly are these designated areas? I'll have Tom send you a map. After I hung up, Sophia looked at me with worried eyes. Dad, am I in trouble for riding my bike? No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. I knelt down to her level. Some adults just get confused about what's important. Is the mean lady going to make us move? The fact that my daughter was worried about losing our home because of Karen's harassment made something snap inside me. I spent that night researching Arizona HOA laws, tenant rights, and filing procedures for small claims court. What I learned was illuminating. Arizona revised statutes required HOAs to provide homeowners with copies of governing documents upon request. Violation notices had to include specific citations to the relevant rule sections. Fines couldn't be imposed without proper notice and an opportunity for a hearing. And most importantly, board members had a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of all homeowners, not just their personal preferences. Karen had violated every single one of these requirements. Tuesday morning, I drafted a formal request for documents and hand-delivered it to Karen's house before work. She opened the door wearing a silk bathrobe and an expression of pure annoyance. David, at 7:30 in the morning. I'm submitting my formal request for HOA documents as required under Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Chapter 16. I handed her the envelope. I'm also requesting a hearing before the board regarding my violations as guaranteed under Section 33-1808. She took the envelope without opening it. This is ridiculous. You're wasting everyone's time over a plant and some cracked concrete. I'm exercising my rights as a homeowner. Your rights. She stepped onto her porch, and I couldn't help but notice the obvious addition work that had never been approved. David, let me explain something to you. I've lived in HOA communities for 20 years. I know how this works. You can file all the paperwork you want, but at the end of the day, the board makes the decisions. We have lawyers, we have experience, you have a printed out document from the internet, and a bad attitude. We'll see. Yes, we will. She smiled that cold smile again. Oh, and since you're here, I should mention that Janet documented some additional violations yesterday. Your landscaping watering schedule appears to be inconsistent with drought conservation requirements, and your exterior light fixtures aren't properly shielded to prevent light pollution. You're making this up as you go along. I'm enforcing community standards that benefit everyone. If you don't like living in an HOA community, David, you're free to sell your house and move somewhere more suitable to your lifestyle. That evening, I got a call from Rick. Dude, Karen came by my house today with her camera lady, cited me for having a welcome mat that's excessively worn and a mailbox that's improperly secured. This is getting out of hand. How many people has she hit so far? Linda's been keeping track. At least 12 houses in the past 2 weeks. The Johnsons got fined for having a basketball hoop in their driveway. The Patel family got cited for decorative wind chimes. Mrs. Rodriguez is up to $500 in fines, and they're threatening to put a lien on her house. A lien? Something about persistent non-compliance with community standards. She's 83 years old, David. She can't afford to repaint her house every time Karen decides the color is half a shade off from the approved palette. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I created a private Facebook group called Saguaro Springs Homeowners United and started messaging everyone I could think of in our neighborhood. The response was overwhelming. By Thursday morning, 26 homeowners had joined the group, and the stories were infuriating. Karen and her compliance team had systematically targeted nearly every house in the community, issuing thousands of dollars in fines for violations that ranged from questionable to completely fabricated. The Petersons had been fined for having non-conforming outdoor furniture, the same patio set that came with their house when they bought it 2 years ago. The Williams family got cited for excessive noise because their 8-year-old son played basketball in their driveway after school. The elderly Mr. Chen had been fined for improper mailbox maintenance because his mailbox post had a small rust spot. But the most shocking revelation came from Jennifer Walsh, a paralegal who lived on the opposite end of our community. I decided to look up the actual architectural guidelines Karen keeps referencing. Jennifer posted in our group, along with a PDF document. Turns out our community was never actually assigned specific color palettes or decorative element restrictions. The builder used standard template language that references approved guidelines to be determined by the HOA board, but no board ever created those guidelines. My phone started ringing immediately. Jennifer, are you saying Karen is making up rules that don't exist? That's exactly what I'm saying. The door color violations, the plant restrictions, the mailbox requirements, none of that is actually in our governing documents. She's citing section numbers that refer to non-existent appendices. What about the safety violations, the cracked walkways and stuff? Those might have some basis, but she'd need to get actual safety inspections from qualified professionals, not just take pictures and declare things hazardous. Arizona law is very specific about what constitutes a legitimate safety violation. By Friday, our Facebook group had grown to 31 members, and we'd scheduled an emergency meeting for Saturday afternoon at the community clubhouse. The agenda was simple: discuss Karen's violation spree and plan our response. But Karen had other plans. Saturday morning, I woke up to find a new certified letter taped to my front door. This one wasn't from the HOA management company, it was from Whitfield Legal Services and marked Urgent Legal Notice. Mr. Martinez. The letter began, "It has come to our attention that you are organizing disruptive activities that violate your HOA community guidelines regarding peaceful enjoyment of property. Your creation of divisive social media groups and your harassment of board members constitutes a breach of your homeowner obligations. Cease these activities immediately or face additional legal consequences." I read the letter 3 times before the absurdity of it hit me. Karen was threatening to sue me for organizing a homeowners meeting. I called Jennifer Walsh immediately. "David, I don't think Whitfield Legal Services is a real law firm," Jennifer told me. "I ran it through the Arizona State Bar Directory and couldn't find any registration. I think Karen is impersonating a lawyer." "Can she do that?" "Absolutely not. Impersonating an attorney is a felony in Arizona, and threatening legal action using fake legal letterhead is fraud." "So what do we do?" We document everything and we proceed with our meeting. Karen just handed us evidence of illegal behavior. The Saturday afternoon meeting was standing room only. 38 homeowners packed into the small clubhouse, and the stories they shared painted a picture of systematic harassment and abuse of power. Mrs. Rodriguez, the 83-year-old who'd been hit with multiple fines, spoke through tears about how the stress was affecting her health. "I saved for 15 years to buy this little house," she said in accented English. "It's everything I have. Now this woman says she'll take it away because my mailbox isn't shiny enough." The Patel family described being fined for decorative elements that were part of their cultural celebration of Diwali. "She told us our Rangoli decorations were inconsistent with community aesthetic standards," Mrs. Patel explained. "We've been celebrating Diwali here for 3 years. Our neighbors always said they enjoyed the beautiful colors." Tom Bradley's wife Sarah spoke up near the end of the meeting. "I want everyone to know that Tom never agreed to most of these violations. Karen overruled him every time he suggested they might be going too far. She told him if he didn't support her enforcement efforts, she'd make sure he was removed from the board." "Where is Tom today?" someone asked. "He's afraid to come. Karen told him this meeting was illegal and that anyone who attended could face additional violations." That's when Rick Santos stood up. "I've been in construction for 15 years, and I know what legal violations look like. Karen's house has unpermitted additions that violate at least 3 building codes. She's got no permits on file for that front porch extension, and the electrical work for those decorative lights was done without inspection." "Are you sure?" Jennifer asked. "I can have the city inspector out here Monday morning if you want proof." The room erupted in discussions. Finally, Jennifer called for order. "Here's what I think we need to do," she said. "First, we need to formally request a special meeting of all homeowners to discuss the current board's actions. That's our right under the governing documents. Second, we need to file complaints with the appropriate authorities about Karen's fake legal letterhead and potential criminal fraud. Third, we need to document every single violation notice and fine to establish a pattern of harassment." "What about recalling the board?" asked Mike Peterson. "That's definitely an option, but we need to follow proper procedures. Arizona law requires specific steps for HOA board recalls." As the meeting wound down, I felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. We weren't just isolated homeowners being picked on by a power-hungry neighbor. We were a community united against abuse. But Karen wasn't done with us yet. Sunday morning, I woke up to find my street blocked by 2 Phoenix police patrol cars and an animal control van. Karen stood in my front yard with a police officer pointing at my house and speaking in an animated voice. I threw on clothes and hurried outside. "Officer, I'm David Martinez. I live here. What's the problem?" The officer, a young Latino man with patient eyes, consulted his notebook. "We received a report of possible animal neglect and code violations. Ma'am here says you're keeping pets in inhumane conditions and operating some kind of illegal gathering space." I stared at Karen, who wore a look of absolute innocence. "I don't have any pets." "What about that?" Karen pointed toward my back patio, where I could see the animal control officer examining something through the fence. We walked around to my backyard, where the animal control officer was photographing a small ceramic owl decoration that I'd placed near my back door to deter pigeons. "Ma'am," the animal control officer said to Karen, "this is a garden decoration, not a live animal." "Well, it looked very realistic from the street," Karen said. I was concerned about proper animal care. The police officer turned to me. "And the complaint about illegal gatherings? We had a neighborhood meeting yesterday at the community clubhouse. It was properly scheduled and open to all residents." The officer looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, homeowners have the right to hold community meetings. That's not illegal." "But they're plotting against the HOA board. They're trying to undermine legitimate authority. That's also not illegal, ma'am. Unless there were threats of violence or actual criminal activity, residents can organize however they want." After the police left, Karen lingered in my front yard, no longer pretending to be friendly. "You think you're very clever, don't you, David? I think I'm exercising my rights as a homeowner." "Your rights?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me tell you about rights. I have the right to live in a community that maintains proper standards. I have the right not to have my property values destroyed by people who don't care about quality. And I have the right not to be harassed by someone who makes up rules as she goes along. Made up. Her voice rose to a near shout. I spent 6 months studying this community before I bought my house. I researched the demographics, the property values, the enforcement history. Do you know what I found? A neighborhood in decline. Property values stagnating because nobody cared enough to maintain standards. So you decided to save us all by terrorizing elderly neighbors and threatening to steal people's homes. I decided to restore order. Every successful community needs leadership, David. People like you, people who resist structure and accountability, you're the problem. You're why neighborhoods decay. People like me, she stepped closer, and I could see genuine fury in her eyes. People who think rules don't apply to them. People who think their individual preferences matter more than community values. People who... She stopped herself, seeming to realize she was on the verge of saying something she couldn't take back. People who what, Karen? People who don't belong in places like this. The mask had finally slipped completely. This wasn't about property values or community standards. This was about Karen's need to control and exclude anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of an acceptable neighbor. I've lived here for 3 years without a single complaint from anyone except you, I said quietly. My daughter feels safe playing in our yard. My neighbors and I help each other out. We have block parties and share holiday cookies and watch each other's houses when we travel. That's what community looks like, Karen. Not fear and fines and fake legal threats. She stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was barely controlled. We'll see about that. Monday morning brought developments on multiple fronts. Jennifer Walsh called to tell me she'd filed a complaint with the Arizona Attorney General's office about Karen's fake legal letterhead, and Rick Santos confirmed that the city building inspector would be out Wednesday to examine Karen's unpermitted additions. But the biggest surprise came when I got home from work. My neighbor directly next to me, Patricia Wong, was waiting in her driveway with an envelope in her hand. David, I need to show you something, Patricia said. She was a quiet woman in her 60s who worked as a nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital. In 3 years of living next door, we'd exchanged pleasantries, but never had an extended conversation. She handed me the envelope. This came certified mail today. The letter was from the HOA management company, but the content made my blood run cold. It was a formal notice that Patricia was being fined $500 for harboring aggressive animals that pose a threat to community safety. Patricia, you have a 10-year-old golden retriever named Honey who's afraid of butterflies. That's exactly what I told them, but look at this. She handed me a second document, a formal complaint alleging that Patricia's dog had demonstrated threatening behavior toward children and other residents. The complaint was signed by 3 people, Karen Whitfield, Tom Bradley, and Janet Morrison. Honey hasn't even been outside unsupervised in 6 months, Patricia said. She's got arthritis and can barely make it down the front steps without help. This is insane. There's more. Patricia's voice was shaking. They're demanding that I either remove the animal from the property or provide proof of compliance with enhanced safety measures, including a 6-foot privacy fence around my entire yard and liability insurance of at least $100,000. They can't do that. The letter says they can under the safety provisions of the community guidelines. David, I can't afford a 6-foot fence, and my homeowner's insurance already covers liability. This would cost me thousands of dollars I don't have. That evening, I called an emergency meeting of our Facebook group. 15 people gathered in Rick's living room, and Patricia told her story with Honey sleeping peacefully at her feet. This is beyond harassment, Jennifer said. This is potentially criminal fraud. They're filing false reports about a dog that anyone can see is harmless. Why Patricia? Asked Mike Peterson. She wasn't even at our Saturday meeting. Patricia looked embarrassed. I think it's because I called the management company last week. After I heard about everyone's violations, I asked them to send me copies of the specific rules about pet ownership. I wanted to make sure I wasn't violating anything accidentally. So Karen is retaliating against anyone who asks questions, Jennifer said. That's additional evidence of abuse of power. Rick's wife, Linda, had been quiet until now. There's something else you all need to know. I work part-time at the community center doing event bookings, and I saw Karen's rental application when she first moved here. She lied about her income and employment history. How do you know? She claimed to be a property management consultant earning 6 figures, but the credit check came back showing unemployment benefits and a bankruptcy discharge from 2 years ago. The rental agency only approved her because she paid 6 months up front in cash. Why didn't you say anything before? I wasn't supposed to see that information, and I figured it wasn't my business. But now that she's attacking everyone? Linda trailed off. There's one more thing. She's not renting her house. She bought it, but she used a shell company name on the purchase documents. I only know because I handle some of the property transfer paperwork for the community center. Jennifer leaned forward. Why would someone use a shell company to buy a house in an HOA community? Maybe, I said slowly, because she was planning this all along. Wednesday brought vindication and escalation in equal measure. The city building inspector spent 2 hours examining Karen's house and issued a formal violation notice for unpermitted electrical work, structural modifications without approved plans, and setback violations that encroached on community common space. But that same afternoon I received a call at work that made my heart stop. Mr. Martinez, this is Principal Thompson at Desert Vista Elementary. Your daughter Sophia is fine, but we need you to come pick her up immediately. What happened? There was an incident involving someone claiming to be investigating your family for child welfare concerns. The person presented herself as a county social worker, but when we called to verify, there's no record of any investigation. I left work immediately and drove to the school with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Sophia was waiting in the principal's office, looking scared, but trying to be brave. The lady asked me lots of questions about you, Daddy, Sophia told me as we drove home. She wanted to know if you ever got angry, and if our house was clean, and if you fed me enough food. Mrs. Thompson said I didn't have to answer, but the lady kept asking. What did the lady look like? She had blonde hair and a white shirt. She said her name was Janet something. Janet Morrison. Karen's fake compliance officer was now impersonating a social worker and interrogating my daughter at school. I called the police immediately. This time the response was very different. Detective Sarah Rodriguez arrived at my house within an hour, accompanied by a social worker from the actual county Child Protective Services. Mr. Martinez impersonating a social worker is a serious felony, Detective Rodriguez explained. If this person accessed your child under false pretenses, we're looking at potential kidnapping charges as well. The real social worker Maria Santos interviewed both Sophia and me to document what had happened. Your daughter is clearly well cared for and shows no signs of distress about her home environment, she concluded. This appears to be a case of someone filing false reports in an attempt to harass your family. Can we prove Karen is behind this? That's what we're going to find out, Detective Rodriguez said. Thursday morning, I woke up to find Karen's white Honda Pilot parked across the street from my house at 6 a.m. She sat in the driver's seat with a camera photographing my house and documenting the time I left for work. I walked over and knocked on her passenger window. She rolled it down with obvious reluctance. Good morning, David. Karen, you need to stop this. Stop what I'm on a public street. Stop stalking my family. Stop impersonating social workers. Stop making up violations that don't exist. I have no idea what you're talking about. The police have security camera footage of your compliance officer Janet Morrison entering my daughter's school under false pretenses. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen looked genuinely uncertain. Janet acts independently. I can't control what she does on her own time. Janet Morrison isn't a real compliance officer, Karen. You made up that position just like you made up half the violations you've been citing. Janet is a concerned community member who volunteers her time to help maintain our standards. Janet is going to be arrested for impersonating a government official and attempting to conduct fraudulent interviews with children. Karen's jaw tightened. If you're accusing me of criminal behavior, I suggest you speak to my attorney. Your fake attorney from your fake law firm, the State Bar Association, is very interested in your Whitfield Legal Services letterhead. She rolled up the window and drove away, but I could see her watching me in her rearview mirror as she pulled into her driveway. That afternoon, things began moving quickly. Detective Rodriguez called to tell me they'd arrested Janet Morrison at her apartment across town. Turns out Janet wasn't even a resident of our community. Karen had hired her as a freelance compliance consultant and provided her with fake credentials to impersonate various officials. Ms. Morrison is cooperating fully, Detective Rodriguez told me. She provided us with text messages, payment records, and detailed instructions from Karen Whitfield. We're looking at charges of conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. Friday brought the community meeting that would change everything. We'd properly noticed the special meeting according to HOA bylaws, and 43 of our 47 homeowners showed up to the community clubhouse. Tom Bradley was there, looking miserable but determined. Even some of Karen's initial supporters had turned against her as the scope of her harassment became clear. Karen herself arrived 15 minutes late with a briefcase and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Attorney James Crawford from Phoenix Legal Associates. Jennifer Walsh immediately challenged him. "I'd like to see your Arizona State bar card, please." Crawford handed over a legitimate bar card and Karen smiled triumphantly. "I told you I had legal representation." "Mr. Crawford," Jennifer continued, "are you aware that your client has been using fake legal letterhead to threaten homeowners with legal action?" Crawford's face went pale. "I'm sorry, what?" "Karen has been sending legal threat letters using the letterhead Whitfield Legal Services, which isn't a registered law firm in Arizona." Crawford turned to Karen with obvious alarm. "Ms. Whitfield, you assured me this was a simple matter of homeowner compliance issues." "These people are trying to smear me," Karen said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. That's when Rick Santos stood up. "Let's talk about compliance, Karen. The city inspector found 6 code violations on your property. Want to explain how you're enforcing community standards while breaking actual laws?" Crawford was already packing his briefcase. "Ms. Whitfield, I can't represent someone who's been misrepresenting facts to me. This meeting is over." He left and Karen was suddenly alone, facing a room full of angry neighbors. "Karen," I said, "you have one chance to make this right. Rescind all the fraudulent fines, resign from the board, and apologize to the families you've harassed. Otherwise, we're proceeding with a formal recall vote and supporting the criminal charges against you." Karen stood there for a long moment, looking around the room at faces that had gone from neutral to hostile over the course of 6 weeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was trying to protect this community." "From what?" asked Mrs. Rodriguez. From declining property values. From people who don't understand how important it is to maintain standards." "Whose standards?" Patricia Wong asked quietly. Karen didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked at me with something that might have been desperation. "David, you have to understand. I've lived in communities that fell apart because nobody cared enough to enforce the rules. I've seen what happens when people stop maintaining their properties, when neighborhoods become undesirable. Undesirable to whom? To families, to professionals, to people who invest in their homes and want to live somewhere safe and clean and appropriate." The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, Jennifer Walsh spoke. "Karen, every single person in this room is a homeowner who invested in this community. We maintain our properties. We follow legitimate rules. We look out for each other. The only thing that made this neighborhood undesirable in the past 6 weeks was your harassment campaign." "Motion to proceed with the recall vote," Rick Santos called out. "Seconded," said at least 5 voices. The vote was unanimous among eligible homeowners, 43 votes to immediately recall Karen Whitfield from the HOA board and call for a special election to replace her. Karen stood there as the vote was tallied, still holding her clipboard. When the result was announced, she looked around the room one final time. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. All of you. When your property values start dropping, when people stop wanting to live here, you'll remember that I was trying to help. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. David, I hope you're happy. You've destroyed the only thing standing between this community and chaos. No, Karen, I replied. I've destroyed the only thing standing between this community and peace. After she left, the room erupted in conversation and relief. Tom Bradley formally resigned from the board, apologizing for his role in enabling Karen's harassment. We scheduled new board elections for the following month and established a committee to review all fines and violations issued since Karen's election. But the story wasn't quite over. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Detective Rodriguez. Mr. Martinez, I wanted to update you on the charges against Karen Whitfield. She's been indicted on 6 felony counts impersonating an attorney, conspiracy, filing false police reports, child endangerment fraud, and violation of civil rights. Janet Morrison pleaded guilty to 3 counts and is cooperating as a witness. What's going to happen to Karen? That depends on her attorney and the plea negotiations, but I wanted you to know that she's also facing a federal investigation. Turns out she's done this before in communities in Texas and Colorado. The FBI thinks she's been running the same scheme for years: move into an HOA community, get elected to the board, harass residents with fake violations until they sell their homes at below-market prices, then buy those properties through shell companies. The scope of Karen's scheme was breathtaking. She wasn't just a power-hungry neighbor, she was a criminal who had turned HOA harassment into a real estate scam. 3 months later, our new HOA board, led by Jennifer Walsh as president, and including Patricia Wong and Mike Peterson, had rescinded all of Karen's fraudulent fines and revised our community guidelines to prevent future abuse. Property values in Saguaro Springs actually increased slightly, and the community felt more cohesive than it had in years. Karen's house went into foreclosure when she couldn't make payments from jail while awaiting trial. The bank sold it to a young family with twin toddlers who immediately endeared themselves to the neighborhood by hosting a block party and asking permission before installing a small playground in their backyard. Sophia, who had been traumatized by the fake social worker incident, gradually recovered her sense of security. She still rides her bike on the community sidewalks, but now half the neighborhood knows her name and watches out for her safety. As for my grandmother's barrel cactus, it still sits beside my front door in its simple terracotta pot. Last month, Mrs. Rodriguez asked me where I'd gotten it because she wanted to plant something similar in her own garden. I told her the story of my grandmother's love for desert plants and her belief that they represented resilience and the ability to thrive in harsh conditions. That's a beautiful story, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Your grandmother was a wise woman. She was right. My grandmother understood that the most beautiful gardens aren't the ones that conform to someone else's rigid standards. They're the ones that grow from love, patience, and respect for what already exists. Sometimes the most important victories aren't about winning arguments or proving points. They're about protecting the simple right to live peacefully in your own home, to raise your children without fear, and to be part of a community that values kindness over compliance and neighbors over arbitrary rules. Karen Whitfield eventually pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to all the homeowners she had harassed and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the United States. The last I heard, she was living in a small apartment in Tucson, working as a night shift security guard and prohibited from having any contact with homeowner associations. The FBI investigation into her real estate scheme led to additional charges in 3 other states, and several communities were able to recover damages from properties she had illegally acquired. Our community learned an important lesson about the difference between legitimate governance and personal vendetta. We updated our bylaws to include stronger protections against board abuse, established clear appeals processes for violations, and created term limits to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power over their neighbors' lives. But perhaps the most important change was cultural. We stopped taking our peaceful community for granted and started actively looking out for each other. Monthly potluck dinners replaced formal board meetings as our primary community gathering. Children play freely throughout the neighborhood without fear of harassment. And when new families move in, they're welcomed with homemade cookies and genuine offers of help, not clipboards and measuring tapes. The barrel cactus beside my front door bloomed for the first time this spring, small yellow flowers that appeared overnight and lasted just long enough for Sophia to photograph them before they faded. My grandmother always said that desert plants bloom when they're truly happy in their environment. I like to think she was right about that too. This is a dramatized story inspired by common HOA disputes, not legal advice.